Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for the third in a six-part series as we journey act by act through The Wild Duck by Henrik Ibsen, and we will conclude this series, of course, with a review on the play itself. So here in the third act, what happened? We are again in Hjalmar's studio. And old Gregers has made a mess out of his place. It seems the rich fella doesn't know how to handle himself when he's in one of these rented rooms, I suppose. Hjalmar sets out about his work as old Ekdal is dead set on moving the water trough inside his nature reserve, his wildlife retrieve. And Gina goes to prepare lunch as Gregers and two others will be joining them for their meal. Then Hedvig shows up. Hedvig shows up. She may or may not be there in order to spy on her old man. It's hard to say. We can't tell for sure. The implication is made. Hjalmar, while he retouches photos, she's sent to maybe spy on him. Ekdal is in his sanctuary really making a noisy battle out of whatever it is he's trying to do that is a precursor to moving said water trough. And Hedvig convinces Hjalmar to help him because she can work on retouching the photos while he's in there with grandpops struggling it out between themselves. Gregers shows up as Hjalmar has left. Enter Gina, rabble rabble. Enter Hjalmar, rabble rabble. Exit Gina, hey, Hjalmar. You remember him? He's got a special invention. He's got a secret too, just like his pops, old Ekdal, does. But we're not allowed to see it just yet, don't you know? Not until it's really ready for public eye can we see it, because these inventions, they are acts of creation which depend largely on inspiration, don't you know? His sole motivation in this life-altering pursuit, as it does take so much time, his sole motivation? Well, his sole motivation would be that his father is returned to former glory. Retain his name as it once was. Make sure that the name Ekdal can move forward in grace as opposed to shame. Then we get this exchange on page 47 between Gregers and Hjalmar. Gregers says, "Don't be afraid. I shall find a way to help you up again. I, too, have a mission in life now. I found it yesterday." Hjalmar says, "That's all very well, but you will please leave me out of it. I can assure you that, apart from my very natural melancholy, of course, I am as contented as one can wish to be." To which Gregers replies, "Your contentment is an effect of the marsh poison." He is making in this portion of the play, Gregers is really making the metaphorical move that the old duck, that old injured duck, is in fact Hjalmar. And we're going to get to this a little bit later. It is an interesting move indeed, especially coming from our writer here. Hjalmar says, "Now, my dear Gregers, pray do not go on about disease and poison. I am not used to that sort of talk. In my house, nobody ever speaks to me about unpleasant things." Really shaking a finger at him, getting on him. "Hey, you're a guest here. Shut the fuck up." Gregers replies, "That I can easily believe." And Hjalmar says, "It's not good for me, you see, and there are no marsh poisons here as you express it. The poor photographer's roof is lowly, I know, and my circumstances are narrow, but I am an inventor, and I am the breadwinner of a family. That exalts me above my mean surroundings." Here comes lunch. So that's where we are, finally, with lunch arriving. Molvik and Relling, the other two guests that are on their way, show up. Argument breaks out during their meal. Relling, it seems, is not particularly a fan of Gregor's, and it's about to boil over when there's a knocking on the door. Turns out it's Werle. Werle has come to have a private word with his son. He wants to talk to him alone, and on 51 we get this exchange. Gregor's, as they are having their speech with one another alone. I intend to open Hjalmar Ekdal's eyes. He shall see his position as it really is. That is all. When he is telling his father that he has a goal in life now. Werle replies, is that your mission in life you spoke of yesterday? To which Gregor says, yes, you have left me no other. And Werle says, is it I, then, that have crippled your mind, Gregor's? And Gregor says, you have crippled my whole life. I am not thinking of all that about mother. But it's thanks to you that I am continually haunted and harassed by a guilty conscience. Werle says, indeed, it is your conscience that troubles you, is it? And Gregor says, I ought to have taken a stand against you when that trap was set for Lieutenant Ekdal. I ought to have cautioned him, for I had a misgiving as to what was in the wind. And Werle says, yes, that was the time to have spoken. And Gregor's replies, I did not dare to. I was so cowed and spiritless. I was mortally afraid of you, not only then, but long afterwards. And Werle says, you have got to get over that. You have got over that fear now, it appears. And Gregor says, yes, fortunately. The wrong done to old Ekdal, both by me and by others, can never be undone. But Hjalmar I can rescue from all the falsehood and deception that are bringing him to ruin. So that's how that talk goes. He then denies his father's offer. His father had offered him a space in the family business, a post to enter the family firm. Gregor's then asks Hjalmar to go on a walk with him, and against the wishes of basically everyone, Hjalmar agrees to go on that walk. So that's what happened. What are we going to be talking about with this act of the play, the third act, right in the middle of things? What I want to do is I want to start on page 46. Hjalmar says, at the decisive moment I won the victory over myself, I remained in life, which is a point to which we will return later. But I can assure you it takes some courage to choose life under circumstances like those. And Gregor says, well, that depends on how you look at it. This idea of choosing to survive. Imagine a duck being shot and falling into the water. It's a struggle at that point, isn't it? Hjalmar replies, yes, indeed, it takes courage. Completely ignoring the inference by Gregor's that perhaps to take one's own life is the brave move. Completely ignoring that. He says, yes, indeed, it takes courage. It takes courage. That's the part that takes courage. But I am glad I was firm, for now I shall soon perfect my invention. Where are we at here? Yeah. So that's where they're getting into that part. A little bit later here, Gregor says, my dear Hjalmar, I almost think you have something of the wild duck in you. Hjalmar says, something of the wild duck? How do you mean? And Gregor says, you have dived down and bitten yourself fast in the undergrowth. And Hjalmar says, are you alluding to the well-nigh fatal shot that had broken my father's wing and mine too? And Gregor says, not exactly that. I don't say that your wing has been broken, but you have strayed into a poisonous marsh, Hjalmar. And an insidious disease has taken hold of you, and you have sunk down to die in the dark. So this wild duck, I know it's backwards for you, and I apologize for that. The wild duck in this moment becomes a metaphor not just for Hedvig, which I think is the direction we were led to believe at first, that injured bird was Hedvig, who is injured by the Werle and is on the verge of rescue, suffering from its wounds being those weak eyes, maybe, huh? But herein, okay, so we can accept that as a metaphor for Hedvig. But now we have Hjalmar, who has been shot by society and is wounded and is perhaps in a place to be rescued. Okay, so we can accept that for Hjalmar. But if we're going to accept it for Hjalmar, we almost have to in turn accept it for Old Ekdal as well. Those two stories being so closely connected. But if we're accepting it for those three, well, Gregor's, he was wounded at the onset of life, wasn't he? And here he is trying to reclaim glory for himself, isn't he? So even if he's not trying to reclaim glory for himself, he's trying to reclaim at least dignity for someone else. Dignity for an old friend, dignity for a childhood friend, someone he's known his entire life. That seems to be a bit of grace claimed. But if we're accepting it for those four, Gina was in a very bad position in her early work life, wasn't she? She is... This would be known had Werle's affair with her been in the open. She would be a fallen woman. Fallen, as if from the sky into the dark place. So there are four characters just right there for whom this central metaphor of the wild duck might be applied. And since we're on the idea of the wild duck as metaphor, let's return to that conversation. So when Gregor showed up, he was sitting with Hedvig and having a conversation. In that conversation, this is exchanged. Gregor says to her, "But I suppose you haven't much spare time," he says to Hedvig. "You go to school, no doubt." And she says, not now. "Father is afraid of hurting my eyes." Gregor says, "Oh, then he reads to you himself?" "Father has promised to read with me, but he has never had the time yet." And later on, Gregor says to her, "So time has come to a standstill in the wild duck's domain." Time has come to a standstill for Hedvig as well. So school is a primary agent of socialization. Socialization being civilization. The girl is wild and uncivilized. She does not read, she does not school, she is simply wandering. Not wandering, but time is stood still for her. And she is, I think that the most compelling case for the metaphor of the wild duck is, in fact, Hedvig. And if we go forward in literary time, Hedvig is used someplace else in literature, isn't it? And it's used to refer to a bird. Where would that be? Harry Potter. God damn it. The girl is wild and uncivilized. That's the insinuation for sure. But Gregor's seems to fancy himself a woodsman, and that makes him wild and uncivilized a little bit, doesn't it? So is this a bait and switch, really, with this metaphor of the wild duck as Hedvig? I think there's something to be made there. I want to get this quote in here real quick from page 41 as well. Gregor's is talking to Hedvig still, and Gregor says, in reference to the duck, "She has no family, as the rabbits have." And Hedvig says, "No, the hens too, many of them, were chickens together. But she has been taken right away from all of her friends. And then there is so much that is strange about the wild duck. Nobody knows her. Nobody knows where she came from either. No one knows where she came from either. Oomph. That's tough, isn't it? That is rough. So that is maybe the main conceit as to how it is that the wild duck is representative of Hedvig. Moving forward, I want to talk about Hedvig herself, or her name. And not just the fact that it's in Harry Potter 2 later. Forget that. Hedvig, so remember last time when we went over Gregor's Werle and Hjalmar's name. Gregor's coming from Gregorius, which is watchful or alert, and Werle coming from Werner, which means guard. So watchful, alert, guard. Hjalmar being helmeted warrior. I never looked up Ekdal. Maybe I should do that as well. But what does Hedvig mean? Hedvig means warrior in the war. Basically, active soldier. Hedvig is the one. If this is a battle for souls, is this a battle for Hedvig's soul? What is the best situation that can come of this for Hedvig? Doesn't really seem like there's all that much positive alternative here. Sure, if her father ends up making that invention and having lots of money, there's something there. And also, we have on page 50, Hjalmar telling her, when in reference to his invention, yes, indeed, then you shall see. Hedvig, I have resolved to make your future secure. You shall live in comfort all your days. I will demand something or other on your behalf. That shall be the poor inventor's sole reward. Is it his sole reward? Don't we learn earlier that his sole reward, is it on 46 here? Yes, indeed, it takes courage. This coming from Hjalmar. But I am glad I was firm, for now I shall soon perfect my invention. And Dr. Relling thinks, as I do myself, that father may be allowed to wear his uniform again. I will demand that as my sole reward. A little bit of a bullshitter, this Hjalmar seems to be. But that's not the worst thing about him. So, we have that Hedvig is a soldier in the war. Soldier in the war of the things which are going on. We have a guard and a helmeted warrior already. Let's go to page 44. On 44, the top of 44, Gregor says, I was just looking at her, the duck. One of her wings seems to me to droop a bit. And Hedvig says, well, no wonder, her wing was broken, you know. And Gregor says, and she trails one foot a little, isn't that so? Perhaps a very little bit, Hjalmar says. And Hedvig says, yes, it was by that foot the dog took a hold of her. Is this a reference to Hedvig's eyesight? Is that what we're talking about here? A reference to Hedvig's eyesight. The wound by which the dog had taken a hold of her. Shot down by the fact that she is illegitimate. The wound by which the dog had taken hold of her, the wound by which she was retrieved to that Werle, is her eyesight. Her eyesight being the very fact by which Gregor's had initially said, oh, yeah, it seems so, huh? That is our initial link to Werle, our initial reason to really be suspicious of their relations. But right around in that exchange there, we've got them all huddled around talking about the duck. And Gina, laying the table, much different images. But Gina, as she's laying the table, says, That blessed wild duck. What a lot of fuss you do make over her. We have no idea in that moment to whom it is that Gina is speaking. Gina speaks to the pack of them. That wild duck. What a mess you make of her. What a big deal you guys seem to stir up about that wild duck. She's not speaking to anyone in particular. She's speaking in general. She's just throwing it out there, baby. All you people make such a fuss of that wild duck. When we are left to contemplate what it is that is the wild duck, it sort of makes sense that Gina makes a fuss about the fuss made of the duck. Doesn't it? Because the wild duck is the albatross. The wild duck is the pink elephant in the room, you know? The wild duck starts with Gina's relations with Werle. And every time some suspicion to Gina and Werle come up, Gina gets standoffish. So here she is, as everyone is crowded around the wild duck, making such a fuss, yelling at them all that they should just move past it, move on. It's over, it's gone, it's done. Can't we just get along? So it is a strange thing to see. It is, I'm telling you, man, Ibsen has been just a wild ride so far. So the big struggle on this side of things, and I think you see me struggling with this from time to time, everything is explicated so well on the page that by the time it's time for me to talk about it, I don't know where to start. It's so well done, it's so well written, it's so even sort of on the nose that part of me says simply pointing these things out makes you look like a dope, makes you look like a dolt. Everyone's there, everyone gets it, you know? And here's the real danger. Maybe I'm going on about something, and there's a much bigger metaphor laying on top of everything that I'm too low to see. If I'm sitting here convinced that Hedvig herself is the wild duck, then I look like an ass talking for 30 minutes about how Hedvig is the wild duck, and everyone is saying, no, it's not just Hedvig, you know, but everything is so well done in these plays that there's almost no place to start talking about them, right? It's almost like calling a football game. You're looking right at it. Why do I have to tell you what's happening? I've always thought that's the strangest job. Talking about a football game that everyone's watching anyway. This feels that way. These Ibsen plays have felt largely that way. So the next thing I want to talk about is on 45. We have that discussion. Gregor says, what is your life mission to Hjalmar? Hjalmar says, do you forget the old man with the silver hair? And Gregor says, your poor father. Well, but what can you do for him? Hjalmar replies, I can raise up his self-respect from the dead by restoring the name of Ekdal to honor and dignity. Gregor says, then what is your life's mission? And Hjalmar says, yes, I will rescue that shipwrecked man, for shipwrecked he was by the very first blast of the storm. Even while those terrible investigations were going on, he was no longer himself. That pistol there, the one we used to shoot rabbits, he has played its part in the tragedy of the House of Ekdal. So, here's something tied up in that I want to talk about. Old Ekdal and young Ekdal both have their secrets. Old Ekdal has this secret wildlife retrieve. He's got all these pinned up animals. Young Ekdal has this invention that he's working on that he thinks will bring him fame and glory and the restoration of his name. Old Ekdal, that wildlife retrieve, looks back on a former time in his life. It is of the past. It is former glory. Young Ekdal, Hjalmar, he is worried about, his secret is about the future. An invention that I've got that is going to revolutionize things and make the name Ekdal mean something completely different, something new. Old Ekdal is obsessed with nature. Young Ekdal is obsessed with technology. Is this sort of a metaphor for the inflection point of the technological revolution? So here's where we are in the story. Back here is former glory and Old Ekdal. Up here is coming glory and young Ekdal. So it makes me wonder if part of this is about the Industrial Revolution. Part of this is about the actual time in which Ibsen finds himself. And if we're talking about in which Ibsen finds himself, on 46, we have Hjalmar talking about his invention. Come now, you mustn't expect me to enter into particulars like that. An invention is not a thing completely under one's own control. It depends largely on inspiration, on intuition. And it is almost impossible to predict when the inspiration may come. That sounds an awful lot like one might describe writing, doesn't it? So is this another place in the play where we get a bit of a self-portrait, pardon me, a bit of a self-portrait on Ibsen. But we also have something else to talk about here. Unless I'm mistaken, it reads as if Old Ekdal, Hjalmar Ekdal, and Gregers have all at some point in the near past, fairly near past, considered suicide, contemplated suicide, been on the verge of suicide. And now, all three of them have a life mission. They seem to be, so far as I can tell, the only characters in the story with something to which they've dedicated their lives. Old Ekdal with his wildlife retrieve, Hjalmar with his invention, and now Gregers with the restoration of the Ekdal name. Gina seems to be getting along fine, but moving through life sort of as one does. Werle certainly seems to be getting along fine, but does not seem to have anything to which his life is dedicated. Hedvig, I don't think we've gotten to that point with yet. We have Molvik? What is it? Molvik and Relling, who show up, and we don't know much about them yet, but it seems to be a statement. What's the old phrase? You have to hit rock bottom. That's how it's put in Fight Club. Oh, I don't know where the quote is in Fight. I've got Fight Club back there, but I don't know where the quote is, so it's not going to do me much good to pull it out. But once you reach rock bottom, it is a man who has nothing for which he would die is not fit to live. Is that Martin Luther King Jr.? Is that who that is? I can't remember. But only after we have something for which Only after we reach rock bottom can we really dedicate our lives to something. That seems to be the statement that is perhaps made there. But that is all I have for this, the third part, Act 3 of a 6-part play, of a 5-act play, and a 6-part series. I've got my numbers all screwy, but I hope to see you back next week for the next episode in The Wild Duck.